Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. We've all seen the headlines, the rising gas prices, food prices. We know inflation is here. But inflation doesn't hit all segments equally. There are certain segments that are disproportionately hurt by rising costs. Then there are some segments of the population that actually benefit from inflationary pressures. And then you have these certain segments that say, what? Inflation? Nah, hasn't affected me all that much. Our current inflation rate is sitting at 8.6% at the time of this filming. But inflation doesn't hit all categories evenly across the board. Gas prices are up 49% since last year. Groceries on average are up 10% as a whole, but meat is up 35% and dairy 25%, and home values are up 10% just for this year. And it's important to note that inflation doesn't hit all areas of the country evenly either. America is a very large and very diverse nation, and any attempt to make a generalized statement about the country as a whole is naturally going to be skewed in one direction or another, because it's so hard to nail down 50 states, 330 million people, and 3.8 million square miles of land to a single data point. Well, maybe we can. Prices are rising. That's probably about as exact as we can get. But anytime you attempt to toss in a figure, it's going to be skewed one direction or another simply because it is an average of the masses. But it still provides useful information because it gives us a general direction. Now, inflation is here, no matter how you slice it. So let's first look at the group that are disproportionately hurt by inflation. Undoubtedly, the group most immediately and most profoundly affected by rising costs are those lower and limited income individuals and families, because they spend a greater percentage of their paycheck on the essentials like housing and food and gas. For instance, let's say we have Albert, who makes $40,000 a year, and Benjamin, who makes $80,000 a year. We're gonna ignore taxes, and when it comes to spending, let's say they have identical spending. They live in the same apartment complex, they buy the exact same food. For all intents and purposes, when it comes to spending, they spend the exact same amount. Let's say their rent is $1,400 a month, groceries $400 a month, and gas $100 a month. So these essentials cost $1,900. Albert spends 57% of his pay on these essentials, whereas Benjamin only spends 29% of his. Then inflation hits. Their landlord raises their rent to $1,500, their groceries go to $500 a month, and gas is now $150 a month. After inflation, Albert is spending 65% of his pay on essentials, whereas Benjamin is now spending 32% of his take-home pay on essentials. Albert saw an 8% increase, whereas Benjamin only saw a 3% increase in expenses. Inflation impacts those with a lower income disproportionately greater. Their budget runs even tighter when there probably wasn't that much wiggle room to begin with. And in a similar fashion, it affects those who are living paycheck to paycheck. And those living paycheck to paycheck actually represent 64%, or almost 2/3 of all Americans. So the vast majority of people in this country. And make no mistake about it, living paycheck to paycheck is not perfectly associated with any income level. 36% of those earning $100,000 per year or more say they are living paycheck to paycheck. Of course, how far $100,000 takes you really does depend on where you live. But lifestyle creep is real, and expanding your lifestyle as you get pay increases is very common. So it's not unheard of to continue living paycheck to paycheck even after several pay increases. And if you're running on a tighter budget, regardless of your pay level, you can really start to feel those increases in prices from inflation. They put more pressure on you. The tighter your budget runs, the more you are at the mercy of others. Another category to consider is retirees that find themselves on a fixed budget, or families with kids. The more people in a household tends to translate into more of a magnification in the impact of inflation. And whether you're running on a tight budget or not, no one enjoys rising costs. Everyone has their own personal approach to investing, their own investing style, and their own personal risk tolerance level. Certain asset classes inherently carry more risk and are more volatile, and generally speaking, with a lower risk comes a lower reward, and with a higher risk comes a higher reward. Savings accounts, CDs, government-issued bonds, and even to a certain extent, fixed annuities are considered very low-risk investments. And inflation has historically run around 2 to 3%, but finding a savings account or bonds that kept pace with that was next to impossible. And with inflation heating up, currently sitting at 8.6%, and the Fed increasing interest rates, we're starting to see interest rates creeping up on savings accounts and CDs. But it is still a far cry from meeting the current inflation level. Government-issued I-bonds are paying 9.62%, which does look pretty incredible in this market. Full disclosure, I myself do have I-bonds as part of an overall well-diversified portfolio, because why not capture it if the government's going to offer you a 10% rate of return? I-bonds are intended to keep pace with inflation, not outpace it, so your purchasing power stays constant over time. But that does mean that they in and of themselves are not a great investment tool for building wealth, if that makes sense. For those who are risk averse, keeping savings, CDs, and bonds as the bulk of their portfolio, inflation is more likely to eat away their purchasing power over time. Yes, stocks are more volatile. They have more severe swings up and more severe swings down, but over the long run, they've proven to be among the best asset classes for investors. Without accepting some level of risk, aka some exposure to stocks, it can be incredibly difficult to build up a nest egg big enough to actually step away from the workforce one day. Still, everyone has to keep in mind their own personal risk tolerance level when it comes to investing, because after all, finance is personal, and building a well-diversified portfolio can help to smooth out that volatility over time. But if you are on the risk-averse side, you should make sure that stocks are a smaller percentage of your portfolio. And it's just my personal opinion, you need some level of exposure to stocks in order to be successful at building wealth. Because without some level of exposure to stocks, it seems inevitable that inflation will eat away your purchasing power. And while the pain of inflation may seem obvious, inflation does have a positive side for some. While inflation can hurt those who simply save money, it can actually help those who borrow money, because it makes the amount they've borrowed feel smaller. 20 years ago, taking out $100,000 for a home was probably a big deal. But $100,000 isn't what it used to be. Today, the typical home is well over $300,000. But guess what? 20 years from now, $300,000 might seem like a comparatively small amount. So if you take out a 15 or a 30-year mortgage, those payments you make towards the end of the life of the loan are likely going to hurt far less than the ones you make at the beginning of the life of the loan. With time, as inflation draws costs higher, it also pulls wages higher. Now, of course, the cost of goods and services and wages don't move in perfect lockstep. Wages tend to move up after the cost of goods and services, and they move up to a lesser degree. That's why inflation stings. But as wages do inevitably increase, those debts you carry at a locked-in interest rate start to feel like less of a burden than they once did, because comparatively, their balance feels smaller. I was born in 1987. The median household income at that time was just under $31,000. Today, in 2022, the median household income is a little bit over $75,000. Incomes rise over time, and those big ticket items might not feel so big tickety as they once did. In a similar fashion, corporations and governments with high debts actually experience a similar win. Over time, their debt feels smaller. Corporations with bonds and with loans start to feel like their debt is less of a burden than it once was. Same with governments, but I don't want to discuss our national debt in this video, perhaps another video for another time, but municipals that run on a balanced budget gain a benefit from this effect as well. When inflation is running high, owning property and real estate can turn out to be a big win. Inflation drives the cost and thus the value of real estate higher. Historically speaking, rarely have there been times when the value of real estate or property have declined. Of course, notably, we all remember 2008, in which the housing industry took a great hit, but it did eventually recover from it, and the effects of 2008 were felt more intensely in specific regions of the country than others. But even if property values do take a temporary hit, let's say you're using it as a rental, likely it's still producing an income for you. And as long as you don't sell during the downturn, you don't really experience a loss, whether it's a rental or your primary residence. It's kind of the same philosophy with the stock market. As long as you don't sell during the downturns, you don't lock in that loss. And I'm a pretty firm believer in that statement of there's only so much land and they aren't making any more of it. So I doubt the values are going to be going down. And what about those people who are largely unaffected by inflation? Those people who are looking around saying, oh, inflation's happening? I hadn't noticed. Or maybe they're saying, inflation's happening? This is my time to shine. I was made for this moment. That's the frugal folks. And I firmly place myself smack dab in the middle of this category. These are my peeps. I've said it before, but frugality runs in my bones. When you keep your costs low and you don't spend all that much, rising costs don't really affect you all that much. Yes, I have altered my behavior on a minor scale, but for the most part, rising costs haven't really impacted our household all that much. The biggest place I've noticed price increases is the grocery store, so I've just made some swaps. Notably, I swapped meat for beans. Meat prices have gone up, but beans are still pretty darn cheap. And also, I don't really buy brand name things. This, same thing as Swiffer, half the price. This, same thing as Gain, half the price. And this last one, it took me a minute. I'll admit, I'm a bit of a ketchup snob. For me, the longest time, it was Heinz or nothing. Don't you dare say Hunt's. You say Hunt's, we're not friends. But I finally did it. I swapped out my ketchup and I don't even notice a difference. How's that for being a snob? How did I not notice a difference? Like, that is literally so upsetting to me. I've held on to this ketchup snobbery my entire life, and literally, how did I not notice? So actually, my grocery bill has gone down, but to my credit, I actually do view it as a personal challenge to try and stay under a certain threshold. Also, I'm a little bit more conservative with my AC. I open the windows more at night. I keep the temp a little bit higher during the day. So actually, our bill this year is less than it was last year. Outside of those two areas, it's pretty much life as usual, and frugal is the norm. For instance, I've always cut my husband's hair, I cut my hair, I cut my dog's hair. I'm basically running a barber shop over here, so if you need your haircut, come on over, we got time. Also, the activities I do are not really inherently expensive. I cook a lot, so we don't really go out to eat. I love to go jogging and hiking and go to the beach and read. These aren't inherently expensive activities, so for the most part, our lives remain pretty much unaffected by inflation. I was actually reading an article in the Wall Street Journal about other frugal people who are feeling pretty similarly in fashion. The fact of the matter is, if you keep your costs low, if you live below your means, inflation won't hurt as much. So really, the best thing you can do to protect yourself against inflation is to invest your money and live below your means. But really, those are good things to be doing, whether we're dealing with inflation or not. How has inflation affected you? What are you doing differently? Let me know in the comments down below. I read every single one and I reply to as many as I can. But that's gonna do it for me today, guys. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing, as it really does help the channel. I hope you have a good one. I'll see you soon. Bye. Let's do it. We're on the more risk averse, nope, personal. I don't know what I want to say next. Oh, well, with lower risk. Oh my gosh, I hate you. Everyone has their own. I couldn't breathe. It was too many words. Didn't know how to remind myself, breathe. But over the long run, so without accepting, no. savings accounts, CDs, but even finding a government issue, so hot. Because if the government, what the frick, stupid airplane. Risk comes a lower, oh my gosh. This is ridiculous. No. That's like a whole lot of me, like right there. Even after of the masses. I don't like that. Seriously. One Direction or simply because it is inflation, and in a similar fashion, it impacts, come on. No matter how you slice it, nope, Anytime you attempt, there's something wrong with my face. We'll call that good.